So I was perusing Reddit a few days ago, and I came across this post, and it said people spent all of Dragonflight Season 4 demanding affixes be removed, increasing dungeon difficulty as a compromise, and praising the changes whenever they were announced. So what happened? And then the post goes on to say something like, you can go back 6 months ago and see the majority of people brigading for months, demanding that Blizzard update Mythic Plus to the state that it's in right now. Then you could go back 3 months ago searching Sanguine removed, Mythic changes, and affixes removed, and see that the majority of people praising Blizzard for these changes, talking about how great M0 was going to be for the casual player, and how cool the Kiss Curse system was, and how cool the new Xalatath affixes looked, and how the removal of randomness is going to be great for pushing keys. So what happened? Isn't the current state of Mythic Plus exactly what people wanted? The majority of complaints now are that the gearing is too difficult, but no one really is able to explain why they need maxed out Myth Track gear whenever they just spent most of their time last expansion working towards AOTC or completing their 15s, yet their answer is mainly to stop gatekeeping gear. Those players wouldn't have gotten Myth Track gear last expansion either, and there's always been a ceiling to gear levels depending on your skill level. So what exactly is the disconnect? So there were a lot of people who actually went on to here and were complaining about basically the affixes in general and saying that basically players were not right with what they wanted. In fact, they actually would prefer the old system back and stuff like that. And I'm going to kind of talk about and just give my thoughts on the current Mythic Plus system that we have in regards to what we have with affixes. We've also seen a lot of people complaining about the Challenger's Peril, with this post saying 15-second time loss on death feels excessively punishing. A wipe on anything 10 plus almost always feels like the key is over. Many of these timers are tight, and many mechanics are a one-person fail point that can kill everyone. Losing 75 seconds for a mistake actually feels incredibly brutal and discouraging, to the point where most people don't even want to try anymore after a wipe. So let's take some time today to kind of talk about the affixes, and I'm gonna give my thoughts. And right off the bat, I want to say that I think that this affix system is much better than what we had in the past. People, and it's just like, dude, I was hanging out with some friends in voice, and somebody goes, "Can you imagine if we had bolstering on this key? Can you imagine if we had Sanguine at the very beginning of Stone Vault?" And no, I actually can't. And whenever you go back to the post from a few months ago that was talking about how the initial talent, or not talent, the initial affix revamp was going to work. Basically, we were getting 4 new affixes that were Kiss Curse affixes, but they were far less powerful than we're seeing currently in terms of the boon that they're giving, in terms of like what buff you were getting. And in addition to that, they still maintain Raging, Bolstering, Bursting, and Sanguine, which would be completely obnoxious in the dungeons that we're having right now. There are so many situations where, you know, bolstering and sanguine are just problematic affixes just in general, and I think it was definitely time to sunset them. And people probably aren't going to like hearing this, but the affixes that they replaced them with are actually pretty good. I don't think they're perfect by any means, and I think that Oblivion, the affix that we have on this current week's reset, is probably the most problematic affix because it's so obnoxious to deal with. But in general, I think that these affixes are pretty good. The buff that they give, while it was recently buffed from 20 seconds to 30 seconds, is incredibly overstated, but people just don't recognize that a lot of the time. They're also changing some of the affixes as well, where, you know, Voidbound is now going to give a 30% CDR and 20% versatility. Getting 20% damage and 10% damage reduction for 30 seconds is bananas for killing an ad. Like, please, you guys have to recognize that this is actually a pretty good change. All things considered, these Xalatath's bargains, and personally, I believe that these have been a smashing success, especially whenever you compare them to what they would have been. Whenever you compare them to things like Sanguine, Bursting, Bolstering, and Raging, I think that I would take these bargains 10 times out of 10, and I think that Blizzard has done a phenomenal job with designing this Mythic Plus affix system. Moving forward, talking about, you know, Tyrannical and Fortified and how they end up affecting keys levels 4 and level 10. I think that Tyrannical and Fortified, while pretty boring, I think that they create an interesting amount of structure to the Mythic Plus system, and they're achieving what Blizzard wants. Now, I think that dungeons have been over-designed in the sense of, I think that they're just too hard to casually play, and I think that that's a different issue. But in terms of Fortified and Tyrannical and what they're aiming to accomplish inside of the dungeons, they are definitely accomplishing that. And I think that having both active on the affixes, or on the affix set, is more of a positive than I initially thought it was going to be. Having them always active at this plus 10 level, which is the level that I mostly interact with the system at, is either like, you know, over plus 10s is where I predominantly play, but having both Fortified and Tyrannical makes the system feel a lot more whole, and Blizzard ends up tuning the dungeons better because they're no longer just tuning around only trash relative to Fortified weeks or only bosses relative to Tyrannical weeks. They're having to tune for both, and I think that that's a positive thing in general. Now let's talk about the Challenger's Peril. Let's go back to this Reddit post a little bit. 15-second time loss on death feels excessively punishing. A wipe on anything 10 plus almost always feels like the key is over. First and foremost, if you wipe in a dungeon in general, your key is going to be over no matter if you are on a 5-second death penalty or a 15-second death penalty. Challenger's Peril is just overly punishing relative to what was already bad. Checkpoints in Mythic Plus are already a terrible system, but you would wipe in a dungeon before, and everybody's leaving your group anyways. You're very rarely going to be timing a key with like a full wipe. I think that the bigger issue that I have with the Challenger's Peril is that it's overly punishing to like one-off deaths a lot of the time, and there's no real ramp up. And while, you know, you probably shouldn't be timing a key with a full wipe or something like that, you should be able to afford maybe like 4 or 5 deaths throughout the entirety of a key, especially whenever it's not like a super heavy push key. Whenever you're still trying to like progress throughout the dungeons, whenever you're progressing, I think that the Challenger's Peril is a little bit over punishing in that way. But I think that, you know, whenever you look at this full discussion on Reddit here, people were so overtly negative about Challenger's Peril, but it's not even like it. Basically, you have 75 seconds in a corpse run, you're already depleting the key anyway. It's like in the old system. Now, I think that we kind of talked about it on the most recent episode of The Bench, and I think that Squishy brought up a great idea where there could just be like some ramping system to Challenger's Peril, because Challenger's Peril, frankly, is too punishing. Now, it could start where the first death is free, and then the second death is 5 seconds, and then the third death is 10 seconds, and then the fourth death is 15 seconds, and that's where the cap is. And I think that that would feel a lot more fair in terms of like death penalty. But in general, what you have to recognize, and a lot of people actually love to point at Challenger's Peril because it's this new thing. This is the reason that they're depleting keys. It's because of this boogeyman Challenger's Peril. But what you need to recognize is the Challenger's Peril isn't the reason that you're depleting keys. And I think that Challenger's Peril isn't a great affix. It's because there's so many dungeons that have so many caster mobs and problem points that are very difficult. Take City of Threads, for example. There is this pull here, and this is just an average pull that a normal group could be pulling. It is a Herald and 2 Silkbinders. This pull requires about 8 interrupts to be able to make sure that everything's locked down, and that's 8 coordinated kicks. If any of these Herald's casts go through, these Twisted Thoughts casts, if any of that cast ever goes through, then you basically just die. And that's on most key levels. Let's say just take a 10 for an example. That's on most key levels of which that mob is going to be killing people. So then whenever you look at, you know, other things like Grim Batol, there are packs that people are pulling together that involve 3 Earth Callers, which require perfect kicks. There are a lot of mobs that are similar to these Beguilers that cast this Seer Mind ability that end up CCing people for extended periods of time. So people are pointing at Challenger's Peril being like, this is the reason that my key is being depleted, because in some instances it is because they've racked up a couple of deaths. But why are they racking up those deaths now that they haven't racked up in the past? And a lot of it's not actually due to the new affix system, but it's due to the over-design of dungeons. I think that's something that really needs to be noticed, is that it's not necessarily on the affixes, although the affix is the new and shiny system. It's just that dungeons straight across the board have gotten a lot harder for players. I think that things like removing CC, being able to like actually interrupt casts, is something that's like really difficult for your average player to be able to deal with, right? Because before, you would throw a CC at a pack, you in cap roar, or you would, you know, thunderstorm, you would press a cap totem or something like that, and the pack wouldn't recast. Perfect. That's a great situation. But now it's no longer like that. Now that Beguiler, first off, you've just juked somebody's interrupt because they were trying to kick into that Seer Mind, and then you stunned it, and then that mob starts recasting again, and you're like, oh my god, now we're right back where we started. And then somebody dies, which is minus 15 seconds, right? So I think that's where I'm gonna leave off on Challenger's Peril. The Peril is problematic, but I don't think the Peril is problematic exactly how it's been described on Reddit by most players. I think that, first off, the biggest issue is the over-design of mechanics and dungeons being just straight across the board too hard. But then the Peril is a little bit excessively punishing in a lot of weird ways. I don't think you should be timing a key if you're having a full wipe, especially in specific spots. Not all wipes are made equal. Not all deaths are made equal. If you have a death right after you press your cooldowns, that can cost you 30 to 45 seconds, plus the death penalty in some instances. If you have a full wipe and you have to do a run back, that no matter how long this Challenger's Peril gave you, sure, this Challenger's Peril might have given you minus 75 seconds. This could be a 2-minute run back in a lot of dungeons. So I don't think it's just as simple as, oh, the Challenger's Peril bad, Challenger Peril bad. I do think it's like too punishing for like the first couple of deaths. Like, we can relax this a little bit, but it's not like this end all be all bad thing. Last affix, the Guile. So the bargains end up getting removed and it gets replaced with the guile. Some people were actually concerned about the guile not allowing dungeons to feel unique enough on a per week basis on like a high key level, and they were kind of wondering if we should actually have the bargains for high keys. And having played out a little bit on the season, I'm going to double down and I'm going to say that the guile is pretty good. I actually have been liking the guile a lot. I don't think it's perfect by any means. I think it was incredibly overtuned at 20%, 20%. But it recently got nerfed to 10-10, and it feels like it's a lot more natural of a curve. You end up losing the the Kiss Curse affix, which, by the way, just so you're aware, if we had the option to put the Kiss Curse affix on the keys, every single high key player would be adding the Kiss Curse affixes to the key because they speed up your keys such a tremendous amount. But I think that the guile has, reduce the amount of homework keys that you have to do. If you have a bunch of bad keys, say you have a bunch of necrotic wake like 12s in your bag or something like that, you just log out for the week. Like, there's no reason to play if you just have a bunch of bad keys. And the dungeons become a little bit more difficult, which is fine. But I think that this is overall a pretty good system. And so I'm here to say, I think that Blizzard's actually done a pretty good job, all things considered, with the affix system. Now, that doesn't mean that the affix system can't improve. This is what I want you guys to know, is that this is not that the affix system can't improve, but just like these blanket statements of saying, now people are complaining about the new Zal affixes, what happened? Isn't this the current state of Mythic Plus that people wanted? Kind of, right? Like, people wanted this for affixes, and I think that the affix changes have been relatively positively received. But whenever you look at like the current state of Mythic Plus, a lot of the reason that people are complaining is because the dungeons are too hard, right? And then the rewards are gated behind a specific level. The reward gating is a little bit of a different issue. But I think that the dungeons being as difficult as they currently are, and then for a lot of people, that chase being that plus 10 key level and it feeling really out of reach for a lot of players, that's the bigger issue at stake here, not the affixes. So whenever you're making criticisms of the system as a whole, I really want to like hammer this. I think that the affixes, and this is my personal opinion, are fairly solid. They can improve. I think that Oblivion is obnoxious to deal with in some specific instances. I think that, Voidbound, if it spawns at the wrong time, can be really annoying, especially whenever the mob has a DR on it. Devour. Everybody experienced a pug last week that didn't dispel or didn't have poison cleansing totem talent and stuff like that. Everybody has an ascendant orb that they didn't see, or it cluttered their frames and stuff like that. Everybody has complaints of the system in some capacity, but I think in general, especially whenever you go back and compare it to Raging, Bolstering, Bursting, and Sanguine, we are miles improved over that. And that's it for today's video. I just wanted to rant a little bit, kind of talk about the affixes, because this Reddit post kind of was like, all right, hold on. Please God, don't send me back, because I just, dude, if you had to send me back and we had Sanguine or Bolstering or any of these other affixes in any of these dungeons, it would just be the worst possible situation ever, and it would suck. And I'm so thankful that we don't have it. And that's going to be the end of today's video. Goodbye.